The golden lights of Golden Oak spilled onto the polished marble floor, reflecting the shimmer of crystal chandeliers that hung above like constellations frozen in time. Kendra Williams paused at the entrance, smoothing the sleeve of her navy dress as though it could shield her from the sudden tightness in her chest. She had been on dates before, awkward, quiet, sometimes charming, but tonight carried a weight she couldn't quite name. It was the stillness in the air, the way conversations hushed the moment she stepped through the door, the flicker of eyes that lingered longer than courtesy allowed. Something was wrong. Her heels clicked softly against the floor as she crossed the threshold. She caught it then. The faint glow of a phone camera rising, the quick whisper behind a manicured hand, the subtle curve of a smirk. A group of her colleagues sat toward the back, drinks half raised, their amusement barely restrained. The sting of recognition spread like wildfire through her chest. This wasn't a date. It was theater, and she was the unwilling star. Kendra's breath tightened, but her face remained serene. Life had prepared her for moments like this. Years of being overlooked, mocked, underestimated. Every time she'd walked into a room where people decided before she spoke that she was too much or not enough. Her mother's voice echoed in her head, steady and strong. They only win if you let them see you break. From the corner of the room, Jessica Moore leaned back in her chair, blonde curls tumbling over her silk blouse like she had stepped straight from a magazine cover. Jessica had always been the kind of woman who believed the world existed for her amusement. She never missed a chance to cut Kendra down at work, tiny insults masked as jokes, backhanded compliments delivered with a dazzling smile. Tonight, her grin was wider than ever, her eyes bright with cruise. Kendra didn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. She let her gaze sweep the room as though she owned the space, as though she hadn't just realized she'd been dragged into an elaborate humiliation. A server appeared at her side, guiding her toward a table set for two in the center of the room. Every eye seemed to follow, every whispered word hummed like static in the air. Her hands remained steady as she placed her purse on the chair. She adjusted the napkin across her lap, each motion deliberate, as if her poise alone could drown out the laughter simmering behind her. Yet inside, her heart pounded with the kind of rhythm that only comes when the world dares you to collapse. She thought of all the times life had demanded she rise, when her mother worked 3 jobs so she could attend college, when promotions were passed over her head, when she sat alone in meetings while her ideas were stolen and applauded under someone else's name. She had learned long ago that dignity was a weapon, sharper than any insult. The cameras might be ready to capture her humiliation, but what they would see instead was a woman who refused to bend. Her eyes flicked briefly toward Jessica's table, and for the smallest second, their gazes locked. Jessica's smirk widened, confident, predatory. Kendra returned it with a calm so unnerving that Jessica's smile faltered. She didn't know yet who she was supposed to meet, didn't know what kind of man had been pulled into this trap, but one thing was certain, tonight wouldn't end the way they expected. The chair across from Kendra slid back, and for a moment the noise of the restaurant faded. She looked up, bracing herself for the worst, some awkward setup, some man roped into Jessica's game who would laugh along with her tormentors. But instead, she froze. The man standing before her wasn't the type she expected. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a suit that spoke of quiet wealth rather than loud vanity. His presence carried a weight, the kind of ease that comes from someone used to commanding a room without raising his voice. Dark hair touched with strands of silver framed a face that was handsome in a way that felt grounded, not polished. His eyes, gray, steady, and piercing, found hers, and in them she saw not mockery, not amusement, but curiosity. "Miss Williams?" His voice was deep, warm, almost disarming. Kendra nodded. "Yes, you must be Daniel." He smiled faintly, polite and measured, and took his seat. Around them, whispers rose like a tide. She felt the sting of cameras capturing every detail, waiting for her to falter. But Daniel didn't seem to notice, or maybe he didn't care. A server hurried over with menus, but Daniel waved it off gently. "We'll start with sparkling water, please," he said. His tone wasn't demanding, but it carried authority. The server bowed slightly before slipping away. Kendra noticed the way the staff responded to him, with respect that went beyond simple courtesy. She studied him carefully, searching for the catch. Why had Jessica chosen him? He was nothing like the picture she had painted when she'd whispered behind Kendra's back about setting her up with a pitiful, lonely man. This man didn't look pitiful. He looked like someone who belonged in the corner office of a skyscraper, not in the role of a cruel joke. Daniel leaned forward slightly. "I have to admit, this was a surprise. My assistant said she was asked to arrange this by a friend of yours." Kendra's stomach tightened. A friend. That was Jessica's trick, disguise malice as kindness. Yes, she said softly, her words carrying more weight than the simple answer. Silence lingered between them for a beat, and then he smiled again. Not the kind of smile men use when they're trying to impress. It was softer, more genuine. Well, I'm glad she did. Tell me about yourself, Kendra. She blinked, caught off guard. Most men on blind dates led with shallow questions, probing for quick judgments. But Daniel's tone was different. His question wasn't about surface details. It was an invitation. She hesitated, glancing around at the tables where Jessica and her group sat, clearly recording every second. Their laughter was restrained, but Kendra could feel the glee radiating from them, waiting for her to stumble. She turned back to Daniel, her chin lifting slightly. I work in consulting, she said evenly. I help companies deal with situations they'd rather ignore. His eyes sharpened at her words, as though he heard the layers she didn't say. He nodded slowly. That sounds important. Difficult, too. It can be, she admitted. But I've learned not to be intimidated. Something shifted in his expression. Respect. Real respect. At the other table, Jessica snickered loudly, tossing her hair as though this entire scene belonged to her amusement. But Daniel didn't even glance her way. His attention stayed firmly on Kendra, as if the rest of the room had melted away. For the first time that night, Kendra felt her breath steady. Perhaps this wouldn't be the trap Jessica had planned. Perhaps, against all odds, something very different was about to unfold. The hum of conversation in the restaurant carried on, but for Kendra, everything slowed. Daniel sat across from her, patient, attentive, waiting for her words as though they mattered more than the whispers swirling behind them. She held his gaze, steady as stone, though her heart drummed against her ribs. The laughter from Jessica's table pricked at her ears. It was the same sound she'd known since childhood, the taunting of girls who thought she didn't belong, the sneer of bosses who underestimated her, the pitying looks from people who believed her skin, her voice, her very presence made her less. Each sound of derision was an echo, and yet, sitting there, she refused to let the past dictate her now. Her mind drifted, unbidden, to memories of her mother. Nights when she came home exhausted, her uniform still smelling faintly of bleach and long hours, but her words were always steady. Baby, they'll try to make you believe you're invisible, but the world can't erase a woman who knows her worth. That lesson had shaped Kendra's life. She had learned to walk into rooms as if she had been invited, even when she hadn't, to sit at tables where no one expected her, and to hold her own with dignity sharp enough to cut through arrogance. And tonight was no different. She straightened her shoulders, the weight of those lessons pressing against her spine, steadying her. You asked about me, she said at last, her voice even, deliberate. I grew up here in the city. My mom raised me on her own. She worked harder than anyone I've ever known. She taught me to never let the world's cruelty become my definition of myself. Daniel didn't look away, didn't glance at his phone, didn't shift with disinterest the way so many men had when she spoke with gravity. Instead, he leaned in, his brow softening. That explains a lot, he said quietly. Kendra tilted her head. Explains what? The way you carry yourself, calm no matter what's happening around you. Most people flinch under a spotlight, you don't. His words were not flattery, they carried weight, as though he had studied people long enough to know how rare such composure was. Her lips curved in the faintest smile. You notice a lot for someone I just met. He chuckled, the sound low and genuine. I've had to. My life doesn't leave much room for mistakes. There it was, a flicker of something hidden, something deeper. Kendra caught it. His words hinted at loss, at responsibility, and though he hadn't spoken of it yet, she sensed the weight he carried. The server returned with sparkling water, pouring it carefully. The glasses clinked softly, and as Daniel thanked him, Kendra noticed again the subtle respect in the waiter's tone, the way he lingered just a second longer before stepping back. At Jessica's table, laughter spiked again, but Daniel ignored it. His eyes stayed on Kendra. So tell me, he said, his voice lowering just enough to make her feel the intimacy of the question. What do you want most in life? It wasn't the kind of question she expected on a blind date, not a checklist of hobbies or favorite foods, something deeper, and it caught her off guard. She hesitated, then spoke, the truth slipping past her defenses. I want peace, to build something that matters. To know I didn't just survive what life threw at me. I changed the story. Daniel's gaze softened, and for a moment the whole restaurant seemed to fade. The whispers, the cameras, the cruel setup, it all blurred. What remained was the quiet recognition in his eyes. Neither of them knew it yet, but something irreversible had shifted in that instant. The evening had settled into a strange rhythm, two people at a table, speaking in a quiet circle of calm while cruelty crackled just outside its edges. Kendra kept her tone steady, answering Daniel's questions, offering small glimpses of herself without giving away too much. And all the while, she felt Jessica's eyes on her like a blade. It happened suddenly, like the snap of a trap shutting. Jessica rose from her table, heels clicking against the polished floor, her glass of champagne dangling carelessly in one hand. She moved with the kind of entitlement that came from never having to doubt her welcome anywhere. Her friends trailed behind with their phones angled just so, ready to capture whatever humiliation would unfold. Well, Jessica's voice dripped honey and venom as she approached the table. Kendra Williams, I didn't think you'd actually show up. Kendra lifted her eyes slowly, refusing to give Jessica the reaction she craved. Why wouldn't I? She asked coolly. Jessica smirked, lowering her voice just enough that only their table and the nearest cameras could hear. Because, darling, blind dates are for people who still have hope. I wasn't sure you'd bother. She leaned closer, her perfume cloying, her smile sharp. But then again, you've never known when to quit, have you? The insult hung in the air, slick and poisonous. Daniel's hand stilled on his glass. His jaw tightened, though his expression remained unreadable. Kendra could feel his eyes on her, waiting to see how she would respond. Inside, her pulse thundered. She had known this was coming, the moment Jessica would shed the pretense of civility and strike openly. But she also knew better than to let anger speak for her. Calm was her weapon, and she wielded it with precision. She tilted her head slightly, her voice level. Jessica, it's interesting you're so invested in my evening. Should I take it as a compliment? A flicker of irritation crossed Jessica's face, too quick for her friends to catch, but not quick enough for Kendra to miss. I just wanted to make sure Daniel here understood what he was getting into, Jessica said, straightening, her tone loud enough now for nearby diners to overhear. You know, before things get embarrassing. Kendra's fingers brushed the edge of her purse where her phone lay. Unknown to Jessica, she had already been recording since she walked through the door. Every word, every sneer, every calculated jab, it was all being preserved. Daniel spoke then, his voice calm but edged with steel. I don't find anything about this embarrassing, he said, his gaze locking on Jessica's with a quiet authority that silenced even the giggles from her friends. In fact, I find it rather revealing. Jessica blinked, thrown off balance. Revealing? Daniel leaned back slightly, as if dismissing her presence without needing to raise his voice. Yes, about the kind of people who think cruelty is entertainment. The color rose in Jessica's cheeks. For a moment, she seemed ready to lash out, but then she laughed instead, brittle and sharp, retreating toward her table with her entourage. Enjoy your little night, she sneered, tossing her hair. It won't last. As she walked away, Kendra exhaled slowly, her control intact, though her hands trembled faintly beneath the tablecloth. That was when a young waiter paused by their table, eyes darting toward Jessica's retreating figure before settling on Kendra. His voice was low, urgent. Miss Williams, if you need proof of what she's been doing, the restaurant cameras caught everything. I can get you copies. Kendra's eyes widened just slightly. It was an unexpected lifeline. She nodded once, her voice steady. Thank you. The waiter gave a subtle nod and disappeared, leaving Daniel walking her with something new in his eyes. Not just respect, admiration, and perhaps beneath that the first stirring of something deeper. Kendra lifted her glass, her reflection shimmering in the water. Jessica thought she had sprung a trap tonight, but what she didn't realize was that the net was already closing around her. The tension in the air lingered long after Jessica slinked back to her table, her laughter trailing behind her like smoke. But Kendra didn't let it cling to her. She sat upright, her chin lifted, every movement deliberate. Daniel noticed it, noticed how she refused to let venom stain her dignity. He studied her quietly, then asked, Does she always talk to you like that? Kendra gave a small smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. Jessica has made it her mission to remind me where she thinks I belong. She reached into her purse and pulled out a sleek black card, sliding it across the table. But here's the thing, she doesn't actually know where that is. Daniel picked up the card, reading it slowly. His eyes flickered, surprised, before lifting back to hers. Williams Consulting, Workplace Discrimination Specialist, Founder, CEO. For a beat, silence pressed between them. The chatter of the restaurant faded into the background. He set the card back down carefully, his expression unreadable. "So this isn't just dinner for you," he said softly. "No," Kendra admitted, her tone calm but firm. "This is a stage she built to humiliate me. What she didn't realize is that I've been documenting her behavior for months. Tonight just gave me the finale I needed." Daniel leaned back in his chair, watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "You knew she'd pull something." "I suspected," Kendra replied, folding her hands in her lap. "Jessica isn't subtle, and people like her, they always think they're untouchable. They forget the world is changing. They forget women like me don't stay silent anymore." There was no pride in her tone, no arrogance, just quiet certainty, honed from years of enduring slights and learning how to turn them into ammunition. Across the room, Jessica raised her glass in mock salute, grinning at her friends as though she'd already won. But Daniel's gaze stayed on Kendra. Slowly, a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, one filled with something deeper than amusement. "Impressive," he murmured. "Most people would have walked out, maybe even cried. But you're different." Kendra's eyes softened for the first time that evening. "Different has never been something people said kindly about me, but I've learned it can be a strength." His smile grew, warmer this time, almost tender. "It is." Just then, the young waiter, David, appeared again, slipping a folded note onto the edge of the table. His eyes met Kendra's briefly, a spark of solidarity passing between them. "The manager wants you to know the footage will be ready by tomorrow morning," he whispered. Daniel raised his brows at that, but said nothing until the waiter walked away. Then he leaned in, lowering his voice. "You have people ready to help you." "I don't fight alone," Kendra replied softly. "That's another lesson I learned from my mother. Document everything. Find allies, even in unexpected places. Justice isn't loud, it's patient." Daniel exhaled slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. He had spent years in a world where power was measured in money, contracts, influence. But here was a woman who carried power of a different kind, unshakable, unbought, unafraid. For the first time that night, he let down his own guard, just a little. "I should tell you something," he said, his voice quieter now, almost hesitant. "I'm a single father. My wife passed away a few years ago. Since then, I've built walls around myself, around my daughter. It's easier that way." Kendra looked at him, really looked, and in his steady gray eyes she saw the flicker of greed, that hadn't faded, the responsibility he carried alone. It softened something in her chest. "I understand walls," she said gently. "I've lived behind them too. But sometimes the walls we think protect us are just cages." The words settled between them, heavy, real. Daniel's throat tightened. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man carrying his burden alone. And across the restaurant, Jessica laughed again, oblivious that the game she thought she controlled was slipping from her hands. Morning light streamed through the glass walls of Sterling Marketing's boardroom, catching on polished wood and sleek silver fixtures. The air was sharp with tension, the kind that made every cough sound too loud, every chair scrape like thunder. Jessica Moore sat stiffly at the far end of the table, her smile thinner than glass, her phone clutched in her hand as though it might still save her. Kendra entered without hurry, her navy blazer sharp against the cream walls, her heels clicking in steady rhythm. She didn't need to raise her chin, the strength in her posture said enough. Behind her walked David, the young waiter-turned-quiet ally carrying a small drive with the restaurant footage. He set it on the table, nodded to her once, and left. The executives shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between Jessica and Kendra. They had been warned. Evidence of workplace harassment, targeted discrimination, and public humiliation had landed on their desks overnight. And now, the woman they had overlooked was standing before them, holding the proof in her hands. Kendra placed a slim folder on the table. 6 months, she said evenly, her voice steady, measured. That's how long I've been observing, documenting, and recording a pattern of behavior inside this company. What happened last night at Golden Oak was not an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a culture you've allowed to fester. Jessica scoffed, her laugh brittle. Oh, please. Everyone knows. You're just looking for a payout. You've been waiting for an opportunity to play victim. Kendra turned her head slowly, her calm gaze cutting sharper than any raised voice. If that's true, Jessica, then why does the video show you orchestrating my humiliation? Why does the audio capture your words, your laughter, your instructions to others to record? She pressed a button on the small speaker before her, and Jessica's voice filled the room, mocking, cruel, undeniable. The silence that followed was suffocating. One of the executives, a graying man with tired eyes, cleared his throat. "Ms. Moore, this is unacceptable." Jessica's face paled. "That's taken out of context." Kendra didn't let her finish. "There is no context that justifies what you did, and Sterling Marketing can decide if it wants to continue carrying her weight or if it values the $8 million diversity contract that's currently under review." She leaned forward slightly, her words crisp, deliberate. "The city doesn't partner with companies that tolerate harassment, and they will know everything." The boardroom erupted into whispers, executives exchanging frantic glances. Jessica's mask cracked, her composure crumbling as the weight of consequences finally settled over her. "You can't do this," she hissed. Kendra straightened. "I already have." Security arrived minutes later, summoned quietly by an executive who wouldn't meet Jessica's eyes. She was escorted out, her protests echoing down the hall, the click of her heels no longer triumphant but hollow. When the room stilled again, the lead executive turned back to Kendra. "Ms. Williams, what do you want from us?" Kendra let the question hang, then answered with quiet force. "I want accountability, real policies, training, structures that protect people, not just profits. I want you to understand that silence is complicity, and complicity ends today." Her words lingered in the air, not as a threat, but as truth. And in the back of the room, near the glass wall, Daniel stood. He had come quietly, unnoticed by most until now, his suit sharp, his presence commanding. His gray eyes found hers, filled with something the boardroom could not touch: respect, admiration, and a growing tenderness. As she gathered her folder and prepared to leave, Daniel's voice carried softly but firmly across the table. "Gentlemen, you'd do well to listen, because the world doesn't bend for arrogance anymore. It bends for strength." Kendra's gaze met his, and for a brief moment the chaos of the boardroom, the downfall of Jessica, the weight of 6 months of battles, none of it mattered. What mattered was the silent understanding between them. And though neither said it aloud, something had changed forever. Golden Oak looked different that evening. The chandeliers still shimmered, the tables still gleamed under their crisp white cloths, but the air carried a hush of expectation instead of mockery. No cameras lurked this time, no cruel laughter rippled through the room. The same restaurant that had once been the stage for Kendra's humiliation was about to hold something entirely different. Kendra walked in, her navy dress replaced by soft emerald silk that caught the light with each step. She didn't rush, she didn't need to. Her presence alone turned heads, not because she was on display, but because she carried herself with the calm authority of someone who had walked through fire and emerged unscathed. At the center table waited Daniel. He rose as soon as he saw her, his gray eyes warm in a way she hadn't seen before. Beside him sat a little girl no more than 7, her dark curls framing a face filled with shy curiosity. Kendra's breath caught. She had heard about Daniel's daughter in passing, but seeing her there, present, part of this moment, made her heart tighten in a way she hadn't expected. "Miss Williams," Daniel said, his voice low but steady. "This is my daughter, Lily." The girl smiled nervously, her small hands clutching the edge of the table. "Hi," she whispered. Kendra crouched slightly, lowering herself so her eyes met Lily's. "Hi, Lily. I've heard you're very brave." The girl's cheeks flushed pink. "Daddy says that about you, too." Something inside Kendra melted. She glanced up at Daniel, and for a moment, the three of them seemed to exist in their own quiet circle, untouched by the rest of the world. Dinner passed in gentle conversation. Lily asked Kendra questions about her favorite books, about whether she liked dogs, about whether she had ever been scared and kept going anyway. Each answer wove a delicate thread, binding them closer. When dessert arrived, Daniel stood. He didn't clear his throat or gesture for attention. The restaurant had gone quiet on its own, diners sensing something unfolding that demanded silence. He reached into his jacket and drew out a small velvet box. Kendra's breath caught again, her hands stilling in her lap. Daniel's voice was steady, but his eyes glistened with emotion. "The first time I met you, I thought I was walking into another obligation. I didn't know it would change everything. I didn't know I'd meet someone who carried storms with grace, who turned cruelty into strength. Someone who reminded me that walls aren't protection, they're prisons." He paused, his voice lowering, intimate yet strong enough for every ear in the room to hear. "Kendra, you've shown me what courage looks like. You've shown my daughter what dignity looks like, and I can't imagine a life without you in it." He sank to one knee, velvet box opening with a soft snap. Inside, the diamond caught the golden light, but the brilliance wasn't in the stone. It was in the way his gaze never wavered from hers. Kendra Williams, he said, voice thick with emotion. Will you marry me? Gasps rippled across the restaurant. Strangers held their breath, waiting. Lily's small hand slipped into Kendra's, her eyes wide with hope. Kendra felt her throat tighten. Just months ago, she had walked into this place expecting humiliation. Now, standing in the same room, she felt the weight of transformation press against her chest. This wasn't about revenge or even victory. It was about love found in the ashes of cruelty. Tears brimmed in her eyes as she nodded, her voice breaking but strong. Yes, 1,000 times, yes. The room erupted into applause, the sound washing over them like waves. Daniel rose, slipping the ring onto her finger, and pulled her into his arms. Lily hugged them both tightly, her small frame pressed between them, the three of them bound together in a circle no cruelty could ever break. Golden Oak, once a stage for mockery, had become the beginning of something sacred.